In a quiet suburban kitchen, a marketing professional was about to lose everything she'd worked for. What started as making morning coffee took a shocking turn when she came face to face with her own breaking point. Audrey Williams wasn't your typical people pleaser. For 3 years, she had spent her life accommodating her parents' temporary pandemic stay, known for her compassion and boundary-crossing tolerance. When she discovered her presentation notes in the trash, she had no idea she was walking into a family war. Audrey's explosive confrontation would lead to ultimatums that shattered their carefully maintained facade. What began as pandemic kindness would become a battle for independence. Her family would never be the same after she finally said no. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The coffee maker's familiar gurgle should have been comforting, but this Tuesday morning, it felt like another intrusion in what used to be Audrey's sanctuary. She stood at her kitchen counter, laptop open, presentation slides scattered across the granite surface she'd saved months to afford. The Hartwell Industries pitch, 6 months of preparation condensed into 30 slides that could secure her promotion to senior marketing director. Audrey, honey, you can't have just coffee for breakfast. Linda Williams emerged from the pantry, arms laden with oatmeal packets and vitamin bottles. Your metabolism needs proper fuel, especially when you're stressed. I can see those worry lines forming. Audrey's fingers tightened around her mug. Mom, I'm fine. I have everything planned. Planned? Linda's laugh carried that familiar note of maternal superiority that made Audrey's jaw clench. Sweetheart, you're 28, not 18. You can't survive on caffeine and anxiety. She began rearranging Audrey's carefully organized presentation materials, stacking them into neat piles. And this blazer, it's too severe. You want to appear approachable, not intimidating. The navy dress would be much better. Robert Williams sat at the breakfast bar, yesterday's newspaper spread before him like a shield. He nodded absently at his wife's commentary, while Audrey watched her morning routine dissolve into chaos. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd bought this house specifically for the kitchen, imagining quiet mornings where she could prepare for the day in peace. Also, Linda continued, now examining Audrey's laptop screen with the critical eye of a former elementary school principal. I scheduled you for Dr. Henderson at 3. You missed your annual physical last year, and I won't have you neglecting your health. The words hit Audrey like cold water. You what? Your physical. I called yesterday, told them you'd been too busy to make the appointment yourself. Linda's tone suggested this was perfectly reasonable. Really, Audrey, someone has to look after these things. I didn't ask you to. Audrey stopped, watching her mother gather the presentation handouts. Mom, please don't touch those. They're in a specific order. But Linda was already examining the papers with the same methodical attention she'd once applied to grading third-grade assignments. These look like duplicates. You really should clean out your papers more often. All this clutter. Those aren't duplicates. Audrey's voice sharpened. They're different versions for different audience segments. Linda waved dismissively. Honey, I organized filing systems for 27 years. Trust me, I know clutter when I see it. She moved toward the trash can, slides in hand. Don't. The word came out harder than Audrey intended. Please, just don't. Robert finally looked up from his newspaper, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Linda, maybe let Audrey handle her work things. I'm helping, Linda replied, but she paused, the presentation materials still in her grip. She can't see the forest for the trees when she's stressed. Remember when she was little? Same thing. She'd get so focused on details she'd miss the bigger picture. Something snapped inside Audrey's chest. 3 years of accumulated frustration, of coming home to rearranged furniture and unsolicited advice, of feeling like a guest in her own life, crystallized into this moment. Her mother, well-meaning and loving, standing in her kitchen, holding her career in dismissive hands. I'm not little anymore, Audrey said quietly. Linda blinked, surprised by the tone. Of course not, sweetheart. But you'll always be my daughter, and mothers worry. Give me my presentation. The silence stretched between them. Robert folded his newspaper with deliberate care, the pages crackling like static electricity. Linda's expression shifted from confusion to hurt, her grip tightening on the slides. Audrey Williams, I raised you better than to speak to your mother that way. And I bought this house to have my own space. Audrey's voice was steadier now, each word carefully measured. My own kitchen, my own schedule, my own decisions about doctors and breakfast and clothing. After everything we've sacrificed, Linda's voice cracked. After giving up our own home to be here for you during the worst time in decades, no one asked you to stay 3 years. The words hung in the air like smoke. Robert cleared his throat, attempting his usual role as peacekeeper. Now, let's not say things we don't mean. Your mother was just trying to help. Was she? Audrey looked between her parents. Her father's uncomfortable retreat behind politeness, her mother's wounded expression. Or was she trying to control? Linda's face crumpled. That's not fair. But Audrey was already moving, grabbing her presentation materials from her mother's hands, shoving them into her laptop bag with shaking fingers. She needed to leave. Now. Before she said something that couldn't be taken back. Audrey, wait. Robert stood, but she was already at the door. The garage door rumbled open, and Audrey backed out of the driveway with hands that trembled against the steering wheel. In her rearview mirror, she saw her parents standing in the doorway of her house, looking lost and confused. 20 minutes later, sitting in the Hartwell Industries conference room, Audrey realized she'd left half her presentation notes on the kitchen counter. The conference room felt like a tomb. Audrey stared at her incomplete presentation slides, watching Mr. Hartwell's expression shift from polite interest to barely concealed irritation. Without her detailed notes, she'd stumbled through the demographic analysis, forgotten the conversion metrics, and completely botched the budget projections. I'm sorry, Ms. Williams, Hartwell said, closing his portfolio with finality. This isn't what we discussed in our preliminary meetings. Perhaps you need more time to prepare. More time. The phrase echoed in Audrey's head as she gathered her materials, knowing she'd just watched 6 months of work evaporate. Her assistant, Jamie, shot her a concerned look from across the table, but Audrey couldn't meet her eyes. Now she sat in her car in the company parking lot, phone pressed to her ear, watching other employees walk purposefully toward their futures while hers crumbled. Breathe. Sarah's voice came through the speaker, steady and familiar. Tell me what happened. I lost it. Audrey's voice cracked. The Hartwell account. My promotion. Everything. Because my mother threw away my presentation notes. She threw them away? She was helping. Audrey made air quotes that no one could see. Cleaning up clutter. Except it wasn't clutter. It was my career. Sarah was quiet for a moment. In the background, Audrey could hear the familiar sounds of Sarah's therapy office, the white noise machine, papers shuffling. AUD, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about the answer. Why did you let this happen? The question hit like a physical blow. What do you mean, let it happen? You've been complaining about your parents for 2 years, the boundary violations, the control, the way they've taken over your space. But you keep allowing it. Why? Audrey closed her eyes, leaning back against the headrest. It's not that simple. Isn't it? You're 28 years old. You own your house. You have a successful career, or did until today. What exactly is stopping you from setting boundaries? The words formed in Audrey's throat but stuck there, too complicated and shameful to voice. How could she explain that every time she tried to assert herself, Linda's face would crumple with hurt? That Robert would get that disappointed look, the one that said she was being ungrateful? That somewhere deep inside, she still felt like the little girl who needed her parents' approval to feel worthy? They sacrificed for me, she said finally. Their house, their independence. Dad's business never recovered from the pandemic. They gave up everything. Did they? Or did they trade one form of control for another? Sarah's words settled in Audrey's chest like stones. She started the car, needing movement, needing to avoid the question. 20 minutes later, she pulled into her driveway and immediately knew something was wrong. Her parents were in her home office. She could see them through the window, moving around with purposeful efficiency. The front door was unlocked. It was always unlocked now. Another small freedom that had evaporated so gradually she'd barely noticed. Mom? Dad? She found them in her office, stacks of papers covering her desk. File folders lay open, their contents spread across every surface. Oh, honey, Linda looked up with bright enthusiasm. Perfect timing. Your father and I decided to tackle this disaster while you were at work. You really do need a better filing system. Audrey's gaze swept the room. Her taxes, medical records, bank statements, insurance papers, everything organized with Linda's signature color-coded efficiency. And there, open on the desk, was her journal, the leather-bound book where she wrote her private thoughts, her frustrations, her dreams. Her mother had been reading her journal. You went through my private papers. The words came out flat, emotionless. Linda's smile faltered. We were organizing, making it easier for you to find things. You're so stressed, and clutter just makes everything worse. My journal was in my desk drawer. Locked. Robert shifted uncomfortably behind his wife. Linda thought, I can speak for myself, Robert. Linda's voice carried a defensive edge now. I was looking for your birth certificate. You'll need it for the insurance change. And I saw the notebook. I was worried about what you were writing. Some of the things you said about us were private. Audrey moved to the desk, closing the journal with deliberate care. Private thoughts in a private book, in a private room in my private house. This is our home too, Linda said, her voice rising. We live here. We have rights. No. The word came out sharp and final. You don't. The silence that followed felt dangerous. Robert stepped forward, his hands raised in his familiar peacekeeping gesture. Now, Audrey, your mother was just trying to help. We all live under the same roof. A roof I pay for. With utilities I pay for. With food I buy. Audrey looked between her parents, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in 3 years. When did I become the child again? Linda's eyes filled with tears. After everything we've sacrificed, this is how you treat us? We gave up our home, our independence, our life savings, helping you through the pandemic. I never asked you to stay. The words hung in the air like a challenge. You needed us, Robert said quietly. The whole world was falling apart. Everyone was scared and alone. We couldn't leave you like that. But as Audrey looked at her father's earnest face, she wondered for the first time if they'd stayed for her, or for themselves. Mark's key turned in the lock at exactly 6:30, the sound marking the end of what should have been a quiet Tuesday evening. Instead, Audrey heard her mother's voice from the kitchen, bright and commanding. Mark, perfect timing! I made your favorite, my grandmother's pot roast. Audrey closed her eyes from her position on the living room couch, where she'd been hiding since the office confrontation. She hadn't told her parents about the failed presentation, hadn't mentioned that her career might be over. The silence felt like the only power she had left. That's very thoughtful, Mrs. Williams. Mark's voice carried the careful politeness he'd perfected over 6 months of navigating her family dynamics. But Audrey and I were planning to grab something quick and catch that movie. Nonsense. Family dinner is much more important than some Hollywood nonsense. Linda's footsteps clicked across the hardwood floors. Audrey had spent a weekend refinishing herself. Besides, we need to discuss this situation with Audrey. Audrey's stomach dropped. Mark appeared in the doorway, his architect's eye taking in the scattered tissues, the way she was curled defensively in the corner of her own couch. What situation? He asked carefully. Her ungrateful behavior today. Linda emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, one of the good ones Audrey saved for special occasions. The way she spoke to her mother, after everything we've done for her. Mark's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Audrey caught it because she'd learned to read his expressions, the way he controlled his reactions when her family dynamics spiraled beyond reason. Maybe we should let Audrey speak for herself, he said. Robert shuffled in from the den, where he'd been watching the evening news at a volume that made conversation impossible, another recent development in their household. Now, Mark, we're all family here. We should be able to discuss family matters openly. Are we? Mark's question hung in the air. Family? The words created a sudden vacuum. Linda's smile became brittle. Robert's nodding stopped. Audrey felt something shift in the room's atmosphere, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Of course you are, Linda said, but her voice carried a new edge. Any friend of Audrey's is welcome in our home. Audrey's home, Mark corrected quietly. The correction was gentle, but unmistakable. Linda's expression hardened. I think there's been some confusion about the living arrangements here, she said, moving closer to where Mark stood. About what's temporary and what's permanent. Audrey watched the conversation like a tennis match, each exchange more loaded than the last. This was the moment she'd been dreading for months, her two worlds colliding in a way that couldn't be smoothed over or ignored. There's no confusion, Mark said. Audrey owns this house. You're staying here temporarily. Temporarily? Linda's laugh was sharp. We've lived here for 3 years. We've made sacrifices, given up our own independence to help our daughter through the worst crisis of our lifetime. This is our home now. No, it isn't. The words came from Audrey herself, surprising everyone, including her. She stood slowly, feeling Mark's encouraging presence beside her. It's my home, my mortgage, my life. Linda's face crumpled into wounded confusion. Audrey, honey, what's gotten into you? Is this his influence? She gestured toward Mark. Filling your head with ideas about abandoning your family? I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm asking for basic respect in my own house. Respect? Robert stepped forward, his voice carrying a disappointment that made Audrey's chest tight. Is that what you call the scene you made this morning? Yelling at your mother for trying to help? Mark moved closer to Audrey, his hand finding hers. The simple gesture felt like taking sides. She read my journal, Audrey said. They went through my private papers while I was at work. Mark's grip tightened. She felt his surprise, then his anger. They what? We were organizing, Linda said defensively. The mess in that office was impossible. We were trying to help. By reading her private thoughts? Mark's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. By going through her personal documents? We live here too, Robert said. We're not strangers. Yes, you are. Mark's words cut through the room like a blade. You're guests who've forgotten how to behave like guests. The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's face went white, then red. Robert's hands clenched into fists. How dare you, Linda whispered. How dare you come into our home and speak to us that way? Your home? Mark stepped forward, and Audrey felt the careful politeness he'd maintained for months finally snap. This isn't your home. You don't pay the mortgage. You don't pay the utilities. You don't get to set the rules or violate boundaries or treat your adult daughter like a child. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Get out. Linda's voice shook with rage. Get out of our house. It's not your house to kick him out of. Audrey's voice surprised her with its steadiness. And if anyone leaves, it won't be Mark. The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Linda stared at her daughter as if she'd never seen her before. Robert looked between his wife and daughter, his face stricken. Mark squeezed Audrey's hand once, then let go. I should go, he said quietly, before this gets worse. As he moved toward the door, Audrey felt her carefully constructed world beginning to collapse. Her parents' wounded expressions, Mark's frustrated resignation, the weight of 3 years of accumulated resentment, all of it pressing down on her chest until she could barely breathe. The front door closed behind Mark with a soft click that sounded like finality. Sleep wouldn't come. Audrey lay in her bed, her childhood bedroom furniture in what used to be her master suite, since her parents had claimed the guest room and gradually expanded into the main floor, listening to the house settle around her. At midnight, she gave up and padded downstairs in her pajamas. The kitchen light was already on. Robert sat at the breakfast bar, still in his clothes from dinner, a photo album open before him. His reading glasses reflected the overhead light, making his eyes unreadable. Couldn't sleep either? He asked without looking up. Audrey poured herself a glass of water and sat across from him. The photo album was one she recognized. Family Christmas mornings, birthday parties, graduations, happier times when boundaries were clearer and love felt simpler. I keep thinking about what you said earlier. Robert's voice was quiet, almost thoughtful. About becoming a child again. In the soft kitchen light, her father looked older than his 63 years. The pandemic had aged him, carved lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when he'd still run his insurance agency. I used to be someone, he said, turning a page to reveal photos of his old office. 40 years building that business. Clients who trusted me, employees who depended on me. I mattered. Audrey felt her anger soften despite herself. Dad, do you know what it's like to watch everything you've built disappear in 6 months? He looked up at her then, his eyes raw with a pain she'd never seen before. To realize that at 63 you're essentially unemployable? That your wife has to watch every penny because her husband failed to provide? The words hung between them like a confession. Audrey had known her father's business struggled during the lockdowns, but she'd never understood the full scope of his loss. When your mother suggested we move in here, it wasn't just about helping you, Robert continued. It was about having somewhere to go, somewhere we could feel useful again. But you are useful. You're my parents. No, Audrey, we're not your parents anymore. Not the way we used to be. He turned another page, revealing photos of Audrey's college graduation. Look at this. See how proud we were? How independent you were. We knew we'd raised you right because you didn't need us. His finger traced the edge of a photo where a younger Audrey stood in her cap and gown, beaming with confidence. And now we've spent 3 years systematically destroying that independence, turning you back into a child so we could feel like parents again. The admission hit Audrey like cold water. She stared at her father's profile, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time as an adult. Not the powerful figure of her childhood, but a man who'd lost his identity and was grasping for purpose in the wreckage of his former life. Your mother? Robert's voice trailed off, then strengthened. She means well, but her own mother was like this, controlling, manipulative. Linda swore she'd never be that way, but when you're scared and feeling useless. He pulled out a handful of old letters from between the album pages. Audrey recognized her grandmother's spidery handwriting. She wrote these to your mother when Linda first got married. Listen to this. Robert cleared his throat and read. A mother's job never ends, Linda. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Your husband may think he knows what's best for the family, but only a mother truly understands what her children need. Audrey felt pieces clicking into place. Her grandmother, who'd lived with them for 2 years before her death, who'd criticized every decision Linda made while simultaneously demanding constant attention and care. Mom swore she'd never be like Grandma, Audrey said quietly. But trauma has a way of repeating itself, doesn't it? Robert closed the letter carefully. Your mother spent her entire career in control, managing schools, making decisions that affected hundreds of children. Early retirement left her with no outlet for that need to organize, to fix, to manage. So she decided to manage me. Robert nodded slowly. And I let her. Because it was easier than admitting I couldn't provide for my family anymore. Because watching her take care of you made me feel like maybe I wasn't completely useless. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of 3 years of dysfunction settling between them like dust. I see what we've done to you, Robert said finally. To your relationship with Mark, to your confidence, to your life. And I see that we're going to lose you entirely if we don't change. Dad. No, let me finish. He turned to face her fully. I'm scared, Audrey. Scared of being alone with your mother's grief and my own failures. Scared of not mattering to anyone anymore. But I'm more scared of what we've become. Audrey reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. For a moment, she saw him as he truly was. Not the controlling figure who'd sided with Linda in every argument, but a man drowning in his own losses and clinging to the only life raft available. We have to find another way, she said. Robert squeezed her hand. I know. The question is whether your mother can see it too, or if she's too far down the rabbit hole to find her way back. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows of the house that had become a prison for all of them. But for the first time in months, Audrey felt like she wasn't alone in recognizing the bars. Sarah arrived at exactly 10 o'clock Saturday morning, armed with Thai takeout containers and the kind of determined expression that brooked no argument. She'd let herself in through the back door, a privilege from their college days that Audrey had never revoked. "Emergency best friend session," Sarah announced, setting the food on Audrey's kitchen counter. "And before you ask, yes, I'm staging an intervention." Audrey looked around her kitchen, noting the way her mother had rearranged the spice rack again and moved her coffee maker to a more efficient location. "My parents are at the grocery store. We have maybe an hour. Then we better work fast." Sarah pulled out her laptop and a legal pad covered in neat handwriting. "I've been researching since our phone call Wednesday. Senior living communities, assisted living options, financial assistance programs. We're making a plan today." The directness of it made Audrey's chest tighten. "Sarah, I can't just—" "Yes, you can. And you're going to." Sarah's voice carried the authority she'd perfected as a therapist. "Because what's happening here isn't love, AUD. It's emotional vampirism." Before Audrey could respond, a knock at the back door interrupted them. Mrs. Patterson stood on the deck, holding a covered casserole dish and wearing the expression of someone who'd been watching the neighborhood drama unfold for months. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," the older woman said as Audrey let her in. "But I heard raised voices the other night, and I thought you might need someone to talk to." Sarah and Mrs. Patterson sized each other up with the mutual respect of two women accustomed to handling difficult situations. Within minutes, they'd formed an unlikely alliance over coffee and shared concern for Audrey's well-being. "I've been watching this family dynamic for 3 years," Mrs. Patterson said, settling into one of Audrey's kitchen chairs with the ease of someone who belonged. "And I've seen this pattern before. Parents who confuse care with control. Children who confuse guilt with love." "Exactly," Sarah said, pulling up a website on her laptop. "Look at this place. Sunset Manor. It's 20 minutes from here. Has assisted living and independent living options, and their reviews are excellent." Audrey stared at the screen, seeing photos of smiling seniors engaged in activities, spacious apartments, dining rooms filled with natural light. It looked nothing like the depressing nursing homes she'd imagined. "They couldn't afford it," she said automatically. "Dad's business never recovered, and their savings—" "Are their problem to solve?" Mrs. Patterson interrupted gently. "Not yours. When my Harold passed, I had to make hard choices about where to live and how to pay for it. It wasn't my children's responsibility to sacrifice their lives for my comfort." Sarah pulled up another browser tab. "There are financial assistance programs, sliding scale fees, veterans benefits if your dad served." "He did," Audrey said quietly. "Army reserves in the 80s. Then there are options." Sarah made a note on her legal pad. "The point is, you research the possibilities, instead of assuming there aren't any." Mrs. Patterson leaned forward, her voice carrying the weight of experience. "Honey, I know you love your parents, but love doesn't mean setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. After Harold died, I was tempted to move in with my daughter in Portland. Do you know why I didn't?" Audrey shook her head. "Because I knew if I did, she'd never forgive me. Not for moving in, but for making her responsible for my happiness." Mrs. Patterson's eyes were kind but firm. "Your parents aren't just hurting you. They're hurting themselves. They're not living. They're existing as appendages to your life." The phone rang, interrupting the conversation. Audrey glanced at the caller ID and felt her stomach drop. Brian. Her brother's name on the screen felt like a summons from a ghost. "Audrey, thank God you answered." Brian's voice carried its usual rushed quality, the sound of someone squeezing a conversation between meetings. "I've been meaning to call." "For 6 months," Audrey said flatly. I know. Work has been insane, and Jennifer's been dealing with the kids' school issues, and—" He paused, seeming to realize how his excuses sounded. "Look, I called because Mom emailed me. Something about you being difficult about living arrangements?" Sarah's eyebrows shot up. Mrs. Patterson made a disgusted sound under her breath. "She emailed you?" Audrey felt a familiar surge of anger. "What exactly did she say?" "That you're trying to kick them out. that you're being influenced by your boyfriend, that she's worried about your mental state. Brian's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone trying to stay out of family drama. I told her she must be misunderstanding something. Am I? Audrey asked. Misunderstanding something? The pause that followed spoke volumes. AUD, I know it's been hard having them there so long. Do you? Do you really know? The words came out sharper than she intended. When was the last time you visited, Brian? When was the last time you contributed anything to their care besides opinions from across the country? That's not fair. You know my situation. Your situation? Audrey looked at Sarah and Mrs. Patterson, drawing strength from their supportive presence. Your situation is that you have a successful career, a house in Seattle, 2 kids, and the luxury of pretending our parents aren't your responsibility. They chose to live with you. They chose to live with someone. And you made sure that someone wasn't you. The truth felt liberating to speak aloud. For 3 years, I've been carrying the entire emotional and financial burden of their care, while you've sent birthday cards and made excuses. Sarah was nodding encouragingly. Mrs. Patterson had a small smile playing at her lips. What do you want me to do? Brian's voice carried a defensive edge now. Uproot my family? Move back to a state I left 15 years ago? I want you to take some responsibility. I want you to contribute financially. I want you to visit more than once a year. I want you to stop acting like their well-being is entirely my problem to solve. Another pause. Then, grudgingly, what kind of financial contribution? It was a start. Not much of one, but Sarah was giving her thumbs up, and Mrs. Patterson was nodding approvingly. We'll talk about that later, Audrey said. Right now, I need you to understand that things are going to change. I'm not their caretaker, their entertainment committee, or their reason for living. I'm their daughter, and I'm taking my life back. After she hung up, the kitchen felt different. Lighter somehow. Sarah was grinning. That, she said, is exactly the energy you need to bring to the conversation with your parents. Mrs. Patterson raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. To standing up for yourself. It's about damn time. For the first time in months, Audrey felt like she might actually have allies in this fight. The question was whether it was already too late to save her relationship with Mark, and whether her parents could handle the truth about what their love had cost her. The Unwelcome Extension, Parts 6 to 9, Part 6, The Conversation. The living room felt like a courtroom when Audrey called the family meeting Sunday evening. She'd spent the day rehearsing with Sarah, practicing her talking points until her voice stopped shaking. Now, sitting across from her parents on the couch she'd bought to complement her hardwood floors, she felt like she was about to detonate a bomb. Linda perched on the edge of the cushions, her posture radiating defensive tension. Robert had positioned himself in the middle, as if he could physically mediate whatever was coming. Both wore the careful expressions of people bracing for bad news. I've been thinking about our conversation the other night, Dad, Audrey began, her hands folded in her lap to keep them steady. About patterns and independence, and what we've all become. Honey, if this is about that boy putting ideas in your head, Linda started. His name is Mark, and this isn't about him. Audrey's voice carried new authority. This is about me feeling like a stranger in my own home. The words settled into the room like stones dropping into still water. Linda's face tightened, but Robert nodded slowly, recognition flickering in his eyes. I know you both love me, Audrey continued, consulting the notes Sarah had helped her prepare. And I know the pandemic disrupted all our lives in ways we couldn't have predicted. But 3 years later, we need to acknowledge that this arrangement isn't working for any of us. Not working? Linda's voice rose. We've created a beautiful home here together. We take care of each other, support each other. You take care of me like I'm 12 years old. The interruption surprised everyone, including Audrey. You schedule my medical appointments, reorganize my belongings, critique my relationships, and read my private thoughts. That's not support. That's control. Linda's eyes filled with tears. Everything I do is out of love. After sacrificing our own home, our independence, our savings, I never asked for those sacrifices. Audrey leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. I offered temporary shelter during a crisis. I didn't offer to become your full-time purpose in life. Robert cleared his throat. Audrey, we understand you're frustrated. Do you? She turned to face him directly. Dad, when was the last time you made a decision about your own life? When did you last have a conversation with Mom that wasn't about managing my schedule or discussing my choices? The silence that followed was telling. Robert's mouth opened, then closed, as if he was searching for an answer that didn't exist. I've been researching alternatives, Audrey said, pulling out Sarah's printed information. There are senior living communities with assisted and independent options. Some offer sliding scale fees, veterans benefits, support services. Senior living? Linda's voice cracked. You want to put us in a nursing home? I want us all to have our own lives back. Audrey spread the brochures on the coffee table. Look at these places, Mom. They're not warehouses for old people. They're communities with activities, social opportunities, independence with support when you need it. Linda shoved the brochures away. I don't care how pretty the pictures are. You're talking about abandoning your parents. I'm talking about healthy boundaries. Audrey felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. I'm talking about being able to come home without wondering what you've rearranged, reorganized, or thrown away. I'm talking about having adult relationships without constant supervision. That man is poison to this family, Linda snapped. He's turned you against us. Mark hasn't turned me against anyone. You've done that yourselves. The words came out harder than Audrey intended, but they felt true. Every boundary crossed, every privacy violated, every decision made for me instead of with me. That's what's turned me against this situation. Robert shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we could adjust some things, give you more space while still living here. Audrey looked at her father's hopeful expression and felt her heart break a little. Dad, it's not about adjustments. It's about the fundamental dynamic. As long as you're living in my house, depending on me for shelter and purpose, we can't have an equal adult relationship. Equal? Linda's voice turned sharp. I'm your mother. There is no equal. I will always know what's best for you better than some divorced architect who can't even keep his own marriage together. The attack on Mark crystallized something in Audrey's chest. She stood up, surprised by her own steadiness. Exactly, she said quietly. That right there. That assumption that you know better than me about my own life, my own choices, my own heart. That's why this can't continue. Linda began to cry in earnest now, the kind of tears that had always made Audrey cave in the past. But tonight, sitting in her own living room, surrounded by the evidence of her parents' gradual takeover of her space and choices, those tears felt different. Not like pain, but like manipulation. I'm not asking you to move out tomorrow, Audrey said, sitting back down. But I am asking you to visit Sunset Manor with me next weekend. Just to look. Just to consider that maybe having your own space might be good for all of us. Robert reached for Linda's hand. Maybe we should consider it. Linda's tears stopped abruptly. She stared at her husband as if he'd slapped her. Robert Williams, how dare you side against me? I'm not siding against you. I'm siding with reality. Robert's voice carried a new firmness. We can't live here forever, Linda, and we can't keep pretending that what we're doing is healthy for any of us. The alliance shift was visible, seismic. Linda looked between her husband and daughter, seeming to realize for the first time that she might be outnumbered. Fine, she said, her voice cold. We'll visit your precious senior prison, but don't expect me to pretend I'm happy about being discarded like garbage. As her parents retreated to their room, Audrey remained in the living room, staring at the brochures scattered across her coffee table. The conversation had gone better than expected, but she could already feel the emotional storm brewing. The real test would be whether her family could survive the truth about what their love had cost each other. Sunset Manor sat on a landscaped hill overlooking the valley, its red brick facade and welcoming gardens nothing like the institutional facilities Audrey had imagined. As they pulled into the visitor parking, she watched her parents' faces in the rearview mirror. Robert seemed curious. his eyes taking in the well-maintained grounds and people walking leisurely along paved paths. Linda sat rigid, arms crossed, her expression suggesting she was being marched to her execution. "It looks like a college campus," Robert observed quietly. "Prison camps can be quite attractive," Linda replied icily. Their tour guide, Janet, was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of genuine warmth that couldn't be faked. She greeted them in the lobby, a bright space with comfortable seating areas and a coffee bar where residents chatted over morning newspapers. "Mrs. Williams, I understand you have some concerns about senior living," Janet addressed Linda directly. "That's completely normal. Most families do." "I'm sure it is," Linda replied with brittle politeness. As they walked through the facility, Audrey found herself genuinely impressed. The apartments were spacious and modern, with full kitchens and private balconies. The common areas buzzed with activity: a book club in the library, a fitness class in the wellness center, residents playing cards in the game room. "We have over 40 activity groups," Janet explained. "Everything from gardening club to computer classes to wine tasting. Many of our residents say they're busier here than they were in their previous homes." In the dining room, they met Harold, a retired teacher who'd moved in 6 months earlier. "Best decision I ever made," he told them over coffee. "I was rattling around in a 4-bedroom house, lonely as hell. Here I've got friends, activities, and my daughter visits because she wants to, not because she feels obligated to check on me." Audrey watched her father's face light up with interest. Robert had always been social, but the isolation of the pandemic years had made him withdrawn. The idea of built-in community seemed to appeal to him. Linda, however, remained unmoved. "What about family relationships? Don't you miss being close to your children?" Harold chuckled. "Ma'am, my relationship with my daughter has never been better. When we're not living in each other's pockets, we actually enjoy our time together." They toured a 2-bedroom apartment that had just become available. The space was bright and airy, with a small kitchen, comfortable living area, and views of the garden. Robert walked onto the balcony and stood there for a long moment, his hands on the railing. "There's a community garden," Janet mentioned. "Residents can have their own plots if they're interested." "I always wanted to grow tomatoes," Robert said quietly. "Haven't had space for years." Linda shot him a sharp look. "You had space at our old house. You chose not to garden." "I had other priorities then," Robert replied, not taking his eyes off the garden below. In the memory care wing, they met Eleanor, an 89-year-old former principal who reminded Audrey powerfully of her mother. Eleanor was leading a discussion group about current events, her voice carrying the same authoritative warmth Linda had once used with her students. "I thought I'd hate giving up my independence," Eleanor told them afterward, "but I found something better, community with purpose. I'm not just killing time here. I'm contributing." For the first time during the visit, Linda's rigid posture softened slightly. She asked Eleanor about the discussion group, about how decisions were made in the community, about whether residents felt heard and valued. As they prepared to leave, Janet provided them with information packets and pricing details. The costs were significant, but not impossible, especially with Robert's veterans benefits and the sliding scale options. In the car, the silence stretched for several miles before Robert spoke. "It wasn't what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" Audrey asked. "Sadness, I guess. People waiting to die. But those folks seemed alive." Linda stared out the passenger window. "They seemed abandoned by their families." "Did they?" Robert's question was gentle. "Because Harold's daughter visits twice a week. Eleanor's son takes her to dinner every Sunday. They talked about family relationships that sounded healthier than—" He trailed off. "Than ours?" Linda's voice was barely a whisper. "Then what ours have become," Robert finished carefully. They pulled into Audrey's driveway, and for a moment, no one moved to get out of the car. The house that had sheltered them all for 3 years suddenly seemed smaller, more cramped. Audrey tried to imagine coming home to silence, to spaces that stayed the way she left them, to the possibility of spontaneous plans without negotiating schedules. "I need some time to think," Linda said finally. "How much time?" Audrey asked. Linda turned to look at her daughter, her eyes red-rimmed but no longer angry. "How long do we have?" It was the first time Linda had acknowledged that their current arrangement had an expiration date. Audrey felt something loosen in her chest. "We don't have to rush anything," she said, "but we do need to have a plan." As they walked toward the house, Robert lingered on the front steps. "You know what struck me most about that place?" "What?" Audrey asked. Everyone there had their own story to tell, their own interests, their own friends, their own schedule. He looked at the house that had become their shared prison. When was the last time any of us could say that? The question hung in the evening air as they went inside, each lost in their own thoughts about what independence might look like and what they might have to give up or gain to find it. The call came at 2:17 on a Thursday afternoon, right in the middle of Audrey's attempt to salvage her relationship with the Hartwell Industries team. She'd been rebuilding slowly, working double shifts to prove her reliability, when Mark's name lit up her phone screen. "I can't do this anymore, Audrey." His voice sounded hollow, defeated in a way that made her stomach drop. She stepped away from her desk, moving toward the empty conference room for privacy. "Mark, what's wrong? What happened?" "Nothing happened. Everything happened. It's been 2 weeks since the dinner disaster, and I keep waiting for something to change. But it's just the same. Your parents still control your schedule, your space, your emotional energy. I'm still the outsider trying to fit into whatever small corner of your life they'll allow." Audrey sank into one of the conference room chairs, watching her colleagues through the glass walls going about their normal lives uncomplicated by impossible family dynamics. "We talked about this. They're looking at Sunset Manor. They're considering. Mark's laugh was bitter. "Audrey, I love you, but I can't be in a relationship where I'm constantly fighting for your attention with your parents. Where every conversation we have is interrupted, every plan we make is subject to their approval." The words hit like physical blows. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need space. Time to figure out if this is something I can live with long term." His voice softened. "Because right now it's killing me to watch you disappear into their expectations. You're not the same person I fell for 6 months ago." After he hung up, Audrey sat in the conference room for 20 minutes, staring at her reflection in the black computer screen. Mark was right. She could barely recognize herself anymore. The confident woman who'd bought her own house, who'd built a successful career, who'd once planned weekend getaways on a whim, had been replaced by someone who asked permission to stay late at work. The drive home felt like traveling toward her own execution. She'd lost Mark, was barely holding on to her job, and was about to face parents who seemed determined to pretend their visit to Sunset Manor had never happened. She found them in the kitchen, Linda preparing dinner with military precision while Robert sat at the breakfast bar, scrolling through his phone. The scene looked so normal, so domestic, that for a moment Audrey almost convinced herself she was overreacting. Then she saw Robert quickly close his phone browser and Linda's too bright smile, and she knew. "What were you looking at, Dad?" Robert's face reddened. "Just nothing important. Show me." The silence stretched between them until Linda set down her wooden spoon with deliberate force. "He was looking at apartment listings for Sunset Manor. Behind my back." The admission hung in the air like an accusation. Robert's shoulders sagged, the guilt written across his features. "I was just curious about the pricing," he said quietly. "About what it would actually cost. After I specifically said I needed time to think." Linda's voice carried a dangerous edge. "After I made it clear that I wasn't ready to make any decisions." "You made it clear you had no intention of ever making a decision," Robert shot back, surprising everyone. "Just like you've made it clear that you think this situation is working perfectly." "This situation?" Linda whirled around to face him. "Our family living together is a situation now?" "Yes." Robert stood up, his phone clattering to the counter. "Because that's what it is, Linda. It's not normal family life. It's 3 adults living in a space meant for one, with no boundaries, no privacy, no independence for any of us." Audrey watched the confrontation unfold with a mixture of horror and relief. Her parents, who had presented a united front for 3 years, were finally being honest about their own conflict. "I knew it," Linda said, her voice cracking. "I knew you were both conspiring against me, planning to ship me off to some institution so you can get back to your precious independence." "No one's shipping you anywhere," Audrey said, stepping into the kitchen. "But Mark just broke up with me because he can't handle being part of this family dynamic anymore." The announcement stopped Linda's tears immediately. "Good," she said coldly. "He was wrong for you anyway. Too selfish to understand family commitment." "Family commitment?" Audrey felt something snap inside her chest. "He's selfish? He spent 6 months trying to navigate around your emotional manipulation, your territorial behavior, your complete inability to let me have an adult relationship. I was protecting you. From what? From being loved by someone who respects my independence? From having a partner who doesn't need to control every aspect of my life?" Robert moved toward the kitchen island, his hands shaking slightly. "Linda, maybe we should listen." "Don't you dare side with her again," Linda spun around, pointing an accusatory finger at her husband. "I've given up everything for this family. My home, my independence, my sense of purpose. And now you both want to throw me away because I'm inconvenient. You found your sense of purpose by taking away mine," Audrey said quietly. "You found your home by making me a stranger in mine. You found your control by making Dad and me feel guilty for wanting basic adult boundaries." The words seemed to echo in the kitchen, bouncing off the walls of the space that had become their battleground. Linda's face went white, then red, then settled into a mask of wounded fury. "After everything I've sacrificed," she whispered, "this is how you repay me." "By wanting my own life back?" "Yes." Audrey looked between her parents, seeing clearly for the first time how their fear had poisoned their love. "I'm done feeling guilty for that." Linda grabbed her purse from the counter and headed toward the door. "I'm going to my sister's for the night. Maybe by tomorrow you'll remember who raised you, who loved you when no one else would." The front door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. Robert and Audrey stood in the sudden silence, the weight of 3 years of suppressed conflict settling around them like debris after an explosion. "She's not wrong, you know," Robert said finally. "We did sacrifice everything. Dad, but so did you." He looked around the kitchen, at the evidence of Linda's complete takeover of Audrey's space. "And I think we forgot that sacrifice is supposed to be temporary. That the goal is to get back to normal life, not to create a new normal where no one gets to be themselves." For the first time in months, Audrey felt like she wasn't fighting this battle alone. But as she looked at her father's defeated posture, she wondered if their alliance had come too late to save any of the relationships that mattered. The house felt different without Linda's presence, like a held breath finally released. Audrey woke up Saturday morning to the sound of her father making coffee, quietly, without the usual commentary about caffeine intake or breakfast nutrition. For the first time in 3 years, her kitchen felt peaceful. She found Robert on the back deck, still in his bathrobe, watching the sunrise over the neighbor's fence. The morning air was crisp, carrying the promise of autumn and change. "Any word from Mom?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. "She called around midnight. Said she's staying with Aunt Carol until we come to our senses." Robert's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. Apparently, Carol agrees that we're both being ungrateful. Audrey wasn't surprised. Her mother's sister had always been cut from the same controlling cloth, the kind of woman who believed love was measured by dependency. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. If Mom decides she never wants to consider Sunset Manor, what are you going to do?" Robert was quiet for a long moment, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug. "For 42 years, I've followed your mother's lead. In our marriage, in raising you kids, in every major decision we've made, it was easier that way. She's always been the stronger personality." "That's not an answer, isn't it?" He turned to look at her directly. "I've spent so long avoiding conflict that I forgot I had my own opinions. But these past few weeks, watching what we've done to you, to your relationship, to your confidence, I can't pretend this is working anymore. Something in his voice told Audrey he'd been thinking about this longer than she'd realized. I called Sunset Manor yesterday, he continued. After the fight. Made an appointment to speak with their financial counselor about what moving in would actually look like. Without Mom. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did Audrey. Because I realized something while she was yelling at us. I want to move there. I want to have my own space, my own schedule, my own garden plot. I want to visit my daughter because I enjoy her company, not because I live in her house. Audrey felt tears prick her eyes. What if she won't go with you? Then she won't. Robert's voice was steady, resolved. But I can't keep enabling this dynamic just to avoid her anger. I'm 63 years old and I want to spend whatever years I have left actually living. The back door slid open, and Sarah appeared with coffee and a box of pastries from the bakery downtown. She'd taken to checking in every morning since the family explosion, like a therapist making house calls. How are we feeling today? She asked, settling into the third deck chair. Like everything is falling apart, Audrey said honestly. Mark won't return my calls. Mom's treating me like a traitor. And I feel guilty for being relieved that she's gone. Guilt is normal, Sarah said, opening the pastry box and offering it around. You've been programmed to feel responsible for your mother's emotional state for 28 years. That doesn't change overnight. Robert selected a blueberry muffin with the careful attention of someone trying to make normal choices in an abnormal situation. I keep waiting to feel worse about this. About the prospect of Linda and me living separately if she won't consider the senior community. But mostly, I feel hopeful. Hopeful is good, Sarah said. Hopeful means you're imagining a different future. Audrey's phone buzzed with a text message. Brian, finally responding to her voicemail from 3 days ago. Talk to Mom. She's pretty upset. What do you need from me to help resolve this? For once, her brother was asking the right question. Audrey showed the message to Sarah and Robert. What do I need? She mused aloud. Be specific, Sarah advised. Don't give him room to make token gestures. Audrey typed carefully. Need you to visit within the month to see the situation firsthand. Need commitment to monthly financial support for their living expenses. Need you to stop treating their care as exclusively my responsibility. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The response came quickly. Financial support? Yes. Visit next month? Yes. You're right. I've been a coward about this. It wasn't everything, but it was acknowledgement. Audrey felt some of the weight she'd been carrying shift, redistributing itself in a way that felt more manageable. I'm going to call Mark, she said suddenly. Are you sure? Sarah asked. Maybe give yourself a few more days. Number. I need to tell him that things are changing, that I'm changing. Audrey stood up, feeling decisive for the first time in weeks. I can't promise he'll want to try again, but I can promise I won't be the same person who let my parents control every aspect of my life. As she walked back toward the house, Robert called after her. Audrey? For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. All of it. The boundaries, the senior living research, standing up for yourself. I'm proud of you for having the courage I never did. The words followed her inside, where she sat on her own couch in her own living room and dialed Mark's number. Whatever happened next, whether her mother came home ready to change or stayed away in wounded pride, whether Mark was willing to rebuild what they'd lost, whether her family could learn to love each other with healthy boundaries, she was finally ready to find out. She was ready to stop being afraid of her own life. 3 months later, Audrey stood in her kitchen on a Sunday morning, watching her father through the window as he tended his tomato plants in the community garden at Sunset Manor. The October sun caught the silver in his hair as he worked, his movements unhurried and purposeful. He looked younger somehow, lighter, like a man who'd finally found his way back to himself. The counter held ingredients for a simple lunch. Nothing elaborate, nothing that required Linda's perfectionist touch. Just grilled cheese and tomato soup, comfort food for a family still learning how to be comfortable with each other. Mark emerged from the bedroom, his hair still messy from sleep, wearing the old college t-shirt that had become his weekend uniform. They'd been taking things slowly since their reconciliation. No dramatic declarations, no rushing toward milestones, just honest conversations and the careful rebuilding of trust. "Your dad texted," he said, showing her his phone. "The tomatoes are ready for harvesting." It still amazed Audrey that her father and Mark texted each other now, sharing updates about Robert's garden and Mark's latest architectural projects. Without the constant tension of forced cohabitation, relationships had space to develop naturally. "How's your mom doing with the cooking class?" Mark asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "She loves it, though she won't admit it." Audrey leaned into his warmth. "Apparently, she's teaching the instructor better knife techniques and has reorganized their spice cabinet." Some things never changed. Linda was still Linda, opinionated, controlling, determined to improve every system she encountered. But at Sunset Manor, these traits made her a natural leader, rather than a source of family friction. She'd joined the resident council, started a book club, and was currently campaigning for better coffee in the dining room. The transition hadn't been smooth. Linda had stayed with Aunt Carol for 2 weeks, waiting for Audrey and Robert to come to their senses. When they didn't, she'd returned home with conditions. She would consider Sunset Manor only if Robert stopped conspiring behind her back and Audrey agreed to weekly family dinners. It had taken another month of negotiations, tears, and carefully moderated conversations before Linda finally toured the senior community again. The turning point came when she met Margaret, a retired principal who'd moved in 6 months earlier and was thriving in her new role as the facility's education coordinator. "I thought I'd be invisible here," Margaret had told Linda over coffee. "Instead, I'm busier than I've been in years. And my relationship with my son has never been better. We actually enjoy our visits now." The doorbell rang, interrupting Audrey's memories. Through the front window, she saw her parents walking up the path, Robert carrying a bag of fresh tomatoes and Linda holding a covered dish that undoubtedly contained some perfectly executed side dish. "Ready for this?" Mark asked quietly. Sunday dinners were still an adjustment for everyone. Without the constant friction of shared living space, conversations felt different, more intentional, less fraught. They were learning to be family by choice rather than circumstance. "Mom, Dad." Audrey opened the door, accepting hugs that felt genuine rather than obligatory. "How was your week?" "Busy," Linda said, settling into the living room chair she'd claimed during her residency but no longer controlled. "The activities director finally listened to my suggestions about the newsletter format, and your father joined the men's poker group." Robert grinned sheepishly. "Lost $20. But I had more fun than I've had in years." They moved to the dining room, where conversation flowed over shared food and separate lives. Linda described her book club's passionate debate about their latest selection. Robert talked about his plans for expanding his garden plot in the spring. Mark shared updates about his latest project, a community center that was incorporating some of Robert's suggestions about accessibility. "Brian called yesterday," Linda mentioned as they cleared dessert plates. "He and Jennifer are planning to visit for Thanksgiving. He wants to see our apartment." It was the first time Linda had referred to Sunset Manor as their apartment, without bitterness. Progress, Audrey thought, came in small concessions. As her parents prepared to leave, Linda paused at the front door. "Audrey, I need to say something." Here it comes, Audrey thought, bracing herself for criticism or another attempt at control. "I was wrong," Linda said quietly. "About Mark, about the boundaries, about a lot of things. I was so afraid of not being needed that I forgot how to just be loved." The admission hung in the evening air, fragile and precious. Audrey hugged her mother, feeling the difference in Linda's posture. Still strong, but no longer rigid with the need to control everything around her. After they left, Audrey and Mark cleaned up together in comfortable silence. Outside, the neighborhood settled into its Sunday evening rhythm, families returning from their separate adventures to homes that sheltered without suffocating. "Happy?" Mark asked, drying the last plate. Audrey considered the question. Happy felt too simple for the complex emotions of rebuilding relationships, setting boundaries, and learning to love without losing herself. But satisfied, hopeful, free, getting there, she said, and meant it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.